And I was just realized we're talking a lot about, there was a song, I send my power, right? The 12 spiritual powers that we talk about in Unity. Unity believes that there are 12 spiritual power centers. Now, many of you are familiar with chakras, that there are 7 chakras, but in Unity, which are energy centers, in Unity, we see there are 12 spiritual power centers. Well, guess what the month of May spiritual power is? Power. And it's the last day of May. And I found that interesting. And do you know where the spiritual power of power resides in the body? If you know it, go ahead and point to it. Your throat chakra. This is where the seat of your power resides. And how many of us don't speak our truth? We tolerate being mistreated. We tolerate, in my story, I tolerated abuse verbally, emotionally, many, many years, and still struggle when I know that I want to speak up and I don't, for fear of either not being liked or fear of somebody wanting to bully back, and then I get afraid and then I retreat because I become a scared little girl. The spiritual power of power. I send my power. Now, I want you to understand, when we do, I send my power, this means personal power within. It doesn't mean this kind of power, okay? And that's a big concern that I'm having right now. Okay, I titled this talk, probably, I don't know, Tuesday, Separation versus Oneness, in case you hadn't seen the talk title. Separation versus oneness. And this whole thing that is happening in the last 48 hours with the incident of the life of George Floyd being taken, his life was taken from him by a police officer. And so many of you have, I'm sure, watched the video, and it's sickening and tore my heart that we can do this to our fellow human beings. And first of all, I want to encourage you, don't keep watching it, because it will do nothing but encourage your ego to want to retaliate. And oneness versus separation. This has been going on. This is not new, people. It is not new. It has been going on since the Garden of Eden. I'm going to just refresh your memory to the story of the Garden of Eden and what took place there. It's a great story, and it is a great metaphysical story, meaning it is a great story in the Bible to metaphysically interpret. Whether that really literally happened or not, to me, is irrelevant. I want to look at that story as to what does it have to teach me? Jesus was teaching in stories and parables. And so it is a great story. If you remember, everything was in oneness in the beginning, right? They needed for nothing. They saw no separation of anything. They were one with the plants, the trees, the animals. They were one with everything. Until one day. And who showed up? The serpent came up to Eve and said, is it true that you can eat from all these trees except for one? And you remember what tree they were not supposed to eat from. God said, you can have everything here. There is only one thing I want you to stay away from, and that is the tree of knowledge. So I want you to stay away from that one tree, and you will have this for eternity. Then the snake, that little sneaky snake, gets into Eve's ear and has a conversation with her and says, you want to know why he doesn't want you to eat from that tree of knowledge? Because if you do, your eyes will be open and you will see everything that God sees. I want to make sure I could go on this because I'm extremely passionate about metaphysics in the Bible. And so Eve thinks to herself, she listens to that voice, right? She's got everything anybody would ever want. But here comes separation consciousness. That serpent to me represents ego. And ego gets in there and starts to have a conversation with Eve and says, you don't listen to him. You can be even greater. So Eve thinks to herself, what can it hurt? Take a little bite of that apple, right? And then what does Eve do? She not only says, yummy, she says, here, Adam, take a bite. And bam, out of the garden they go. This is the beginning of separation consciousness. This is where man starts to lose oneness consciousness. You know, let me get my... Remember after that happened, right? God says, you two are banished. Get out, right? You're banished from this. And you will grovel on the ground in the desert, and you will eat dust. And here we are, humans still continuing to struggle in the desert of separation. In the desert of separation. I was looking in the Bible last night. I wanted to know where it said, who is my neighbor? And I found it in Luke. And many of you know, right, the writers of the Gospels in the New Testament are what? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Luke, if you remember, I share this with you every Christmas story, is Luke was more of a humanist writer. He was a metaphysician back in those days. And so he was more what we would call nowadays like an herbalist doctor. Okay. So he found healing. He looked to nature. And so his writings were always going to be more from a heart, more from his heart and more about emotions. And he uses animals a lot in his talks, his writings as well. So this is where it came from. Who is my neighbor was asked, they asked. And Jesus, of course, doesn't just answer it. He answers in a story. And he says, he's talking about a man who had been basically thrown to the side of the road, had been beaten, had been robbed, had been basically left for dead. And a priest walks down the road and sees this man lying on the road, bleeding, half naked, and looks at him and walks on by. Then he says a Levite came by, looked at the man, saw his distress, but continued to walk. Then, you remember who came by next? The Samaritan. Now, I don't know if you realize, who were the Samaritans? The Samaritans were half Jew and half Gentile. So they were basically disowned by the Jews. The Samaritan looks at the man in distress, and what does he do? He's the one that leans down and helps him. And he doesn't just help him, he takes him to an inn and then takes care of him for 24 hours and then says to the innkeeper, he gives him money and says, please take care of this man until he is well enough to go out on his own. Here is some money. And when I come back, I will even pay you whatever you have spent on this man to help him. This is the Samaritan, the half Jew, half Gentile. Are you starting to see where I'm going with any of this? On how we get into the priest saw separation. The Levite saw separation. The Samaritan saw oneness. In that same section of Luke, it goes on to say, keep knocking, keep asking, and keep knocking. I think that's an important message for all of us right now. It's keep asking God, your higher power, and keep knocking on the door of your higher power. I call it God. Keep knocking and asking, because the answer will come on how you navigate through traumatic times. It goes on in the same book of Luke, goes on to say, a house divided cannot stand. We're not talking here about a physical house. We are talking about humanity is the house. And divided, it cannot stand. People, when are we going to get it? You know that Samaritan story? The Samaritans go back to like 722 or 772 BC. This is nothing new. And what is still going on over in Israel, Pakistan, what's going on over there? It's still divided because it's still of the consciousness of us and them. And we've got it right here, and we've had it in our world, our United States, our cities, my little city of North College Hill. So we can take it to the global level. We can take it to the historical level. We can start to bring it down to the United States. We can start to bring it down to Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, our tri-state area, and you can take it to your smaller community. We're still divided. We'd like to think that we're not. But why is it that I live in a very mixed community and I love it? And I noticed Saturday night, right? It was a beautiful night. Usually my whole street is outside bumping and playing music and just laughing it up. Nobody was outside. But what I did hear sitting on my porch were sirens and helicopters. We were at a birthday party in Columbus yesterday, outside of Columbus. and alerts came on my phone. I don't know if that happened here in Cincinnati, but it did if you were anywhere close by in Columbus. Alerts came on everybody's phone. Do not go into downtown Columbus. It was 3:00 in the afternoon. Do not. The streets are closed. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm not saying anything that you don't already know. Nothing is solved through violence. Nothing. We must return to faith. We must return to faith. A house divided cannot stand. How much longer are we going to keep falling? In my prayer last night, one of my many prayers last night, I did the WWJD. What would Jesus do? And it came clear. We must return to faith. You know, Jesus, Buddha, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. Did I mention Jesus? They all were teaching us by their great example. In Unity, we often refer to Jesus as our master teacher and way shower. Absolutely. And we also honor other great teachers and way showers. And these are some of them that I just mentioned: Buddha, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela. They were all teaching us by their great example. They were all walking examples of how to move through transformation. I want to point out Nelson Mandela right now. For most of you, I would think, maybe not. But if you read or YouTube, look up the history of Nelson Mandela, he was not a nice man. He was brutal. He was brutal. Talk about separation consciousness. That man was totally in separation consciousness. And then, as we all know, he was eventually arrested and served more time in prison, I believe, than his age when he went in. And he comes out totally transformed. Totally transformed. And then becomes an agent for peace for the rest of his life. This is what our master teachers and way showers do. But I'm using Nelson Mandela because he was a very mean and brutal and separated consciousness man. And we are in, as I talked about, I think a week or two ago, we are in an unprecedented time of transformation as a human species. And this whole thing with the jogger, with George Floyd, and with many others that have gone before them. Senseless brutality. That if we look at it, are we willing to own? Are you and me, are we willing to own? Last week's service talked about if you spot it, you got it. So if you're spotting brutality out there, are you willing to look at yourself and how you subtly, I'll put it in the I statement, how I subtly, very subtly, can be brutal in my own way? Can I look at how I still have prejudices that were brought and taught to me in my early childhood days? I'd like to say, oh no, I'm beyond that. I think I am, but am I really willing to look deep at if they don't look like me or act like me or worship like me or eat like me? It could go on, couldn't it? To the point of, oh, they're spraying with Roundup. Immediately, I make a judgment. What? That's how subtle it is, people. So until we drop labeling people, until we drop the separation and stay, as Martha Creek would say, in our own lane and know that oneness in the scheme of things, take away what they look like, take away what they eat. You go to your heart and we are all one. I know that you know this. I know that you know this. I want to read something to you. I'm going to read a couple things here. Number one, this comes out of, sorry about the clip there. It's Unity and the Course in Miracles and what their commonalities are of the Course in Miracles and Unity's statements. But it says here, we must understand clearly that the real life of all men and women is identical with our own, and that aside from the one life, all is an illusion. That's hard to take. That all seeming differences in people are caused by selfishness or desire for something separate and apart from God. We all are tempted all the time to take the bite from the apple. I want to read that part again. All seeming differences in people are caused by selfishness and a desire for something separate and apart from God or our fellow man. We're in a transformation. And in transformation, people die, people suffer, disease happens, and at the same time, people are born, people are loving, people are kind, people are generous. But I love what came out of this book that we've just been sharing with you over the last 30 days, Fearless Living. And it talks about the 3 stages of transformation. And I'm going to repeat this again because I know I brought this up a week or 2 ago. Number 1 in transformation is separation. We feel separate. Okay, be honest with yourself. Anybody been feeling separate lately? It's painful, isn't it? It's very painful to see the separation out there and to feel the separation in here. The spiritual process at a deeper level is beginning when we feel and recognize the separation. This number 2, dwelling at the threshold, surrendering to the unknown. That is where we are. The time between no longer and not yet. We have died to who we were, but not yet reborn to who we might become. We are at the doorway, the threshold of a new potential. Through tragedy comes awareness. And that's what I hope we are at the threshold of. is that more and more people are becoming aware that we are all in this together. Talked about this 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about it through the lens of the coronavirus. This week, we're talking about the same daggone thing, except we're talking about it through the lens of tragic deaths. We are at the doorway, the threshold. There's a great unknown where ordeals are faced, allies appear. That's Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. And the gifts of trusting in and surrendering to a larger divine reality. Surrender to the larger divine reality. Number 3, the final stage of transformation is the return, from transformation to rebirth, to our true identity, to our God self. When we realize each and every human being was made in the image and likeness of God. This outer shell means nothing. True? I need a thumbs up. Is anybody listening? This means nothing. Blue eyes, brown eyes, I don't care what it is. Teeth, no teeth. We are one. We are one. We are all made in the image and likeness of God. But we will not heal until we are willing to look at ourselves. Look at ourselves. What is it? Again, I said this last week, if I'm going to try to take that log out of your eye, I better be looking at the log in my own eye. Are you willing? Are you brave enough to look at yourself and your consciousness? That's how we heal. I'm all about peace rallies. I'm all about that. Mother Teresa said it best when asked to speak at an anti-war rally. She said, I will have no part of that. But if you want me to come and speak about peace, I'll be there. This is an important message, people. Don't get into conversations about what you're against and let's rah-rah about what we're against. And that's not fair. And this is wrong. And this is wrong. Our job as light bearers are to speak and act about what we are for. What we are for. Have you got that? That's my challenge to myself. And that's my challenge to all of you and to the world. And if you find any kind of hope in this message today, I hope that you are willing to share it through your Facebook friends, through your email, because Sandy puts all of this on YouTube. So there's a YouTube channel that happens about an hour or two after this service. And you can go to YouTube and you can copy that link and share it with your friends. That is how you help make a difference in this world and light others' candles. It's our job. You've been called here to do big work. We are the messiahs the world has been waiting for, not just Jesus. All of us have come here to do big work. And it takes being vulnerable and being honest. But don't call it out until you're willing to look at yourself. I love you all. And I am so proud to be on this journey with so many other bright candles. I honor, as I end with namaste, I honor that truly each one of you are a perfect child of God. And I honor that and see that in you. As I see that in myself, I honor that in each and every one of you. Namaste.